Hello everyone, we're underway. Sorry about that slight delay. My name's Kate Nagel and it's my pleasure to be facilitator of this session. It's going to be a great hour that we're going to spend with a number of my colleagues from the Tropical Australian Academic Health Centre who are really our experts for the hour, which is fantastic. So we've got Sarah Larkin, Stephanie Top and Ray Thomas. I'm speaking to you from the Bindal, from the lands of the Bindal and the Wulgurukaba people. And on your behalf, I acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the custodians of the lands on which we live, work and learn. We respect their elders past and present, and we will work as one community for the benefit of all. The program that we have put together for you is to spend the first few minutes just talking about the Women's Health Research Translation Network's funding round that's underway. And then we're going to turbocharge your grant writing and allow perhaps our speakers to share their experiences, but we really want this to be as interactive as possible. So we'd like you to really ask questions, and we will just make it a fluid event with you engaging with Sarah, Stephanie and Ray, and asking the questions that are relevant to you. So WHRTN came about from a 2020 grant success through the MRFF with Helena Teed, Professor Helena Teed as the CIA on that project. So we've got $5 million over 5 years and we're almost half the way through. ARA WHRTN seeks to empower and improve the equity, health and quality of life for all women. And we've actually drawn together a collaborative of 14 centres now, which aim to provide a unique opportunity in national research priority areas focused directly on improving the health of Australian women and building the capacity and capability of women researchers in women's health research. So you can see the centres down the right-hand side. That's not an up-to-date slide because we've got a few more centres that have joined us. And as I said, Sarah, Stephanie and Ray and I come from TARC down the bottom. The priority areas of TARC, which obviously relevant for you to know if you're going to put an application in for the funding round, are itemised there on the screen before you, and you will see that they reflect the National Women's Health Strategy priority areas. So across the life course, but also areas of a particular need that have been identified. So important for you to know, the 2023 EMCR awards are now open and they close on the 29th of May. What I'll do is I'll post that website there, which is the WHRTN website, and it has all the details that you'll want to know about the funding round. But in brief, there are 28 awards of $10,000 each, a minimum of one award per ARA centre, those 14 centres that I spoke of, and the rest will be allocated based on merit. The projects need to commence on the 1st of September, and the funding must be completed. That's a big must be completed in 12 months' time. So I've got a little bit more information for you about that, but essentially they're really to focus on the individual's career development and enhancement activities. Just a little bit about the selection criteria. Early and mid-career researchers who identify as female and working in women's health research and translation are eligible, need to be employees of an accredited centre or of an affiliated centre, pursuing research in public health, clinical and health services research and translation. There must be one or more of the priority areas addressed in the application, and you need to be supervised by an experienced postdoctoral researcher who is affiliated in some way with the ARA Centre. The awards are funded discrete projects, so that is not a shared application with a clear beginning and end point. So again, not part of another grant. So just to reinforce the important timelines there, the grants are open. They open on the 4th of April. They close on the 29th of March. Funding successful applicants will be notified on the 8th of August. The awards commence on the 1st, sorry, the activities commences on the 1st of September and concludes on the 31st of August 2024. There's the reporting at 6 months and a final report, and the date that needs to be submitted is the 30th of September with no variation allowed there. That is because we've got strict funding reporting cycles ourselves to the NHLMIC, so we need to keep you to task on that. Important to say, and you'll see from the website, that we ask you to address contingency plans. So you can imagine the COVID contingency plans we didn't see coming. So we've learned from that, and we need you to put contingency plans for predictable or unpredictable events that might cause delay in your project. So we need to give some consideration to that. So I'm happy to take any questions perhaps towards the end. If you want to pop them in the chat, I'll take them when it appears appropriate. But without further ado, I would like to introduce our speakers. So we've got, well, speakers, I suppose they're speakers, we'll give you that. Speakers and presenters or responders. We have Professor Sarah Larkins, and Sarah is Professor. Well, perhaps, Sarah, you might like to introduce yourself.
Sure, Kate, I can do that. Look, I'm coming to you from beautiful Gurrumbabara or Townsville. It's Wulgurukapa and Bindor country. I'm a GP and health systems researcher and Professor of Health Systems Strengthening at James Cook Uni, and also convener of the clinical leadership group of the Tropical Australian Academic Health Centre. Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah. Over to Stephanie.
Thanks, Kate. Good afternoon, everyone. So I am Associate Professor Steph Top. I work in the College of Public Health, Medical and Veterinary Sciences, where I co-coordinate the Masters of Public Health and Masters of Global Development. I'm a health systems researcher with a focus on governance for equity of health outcomes. I have a particular interest in human resources for health, and sort of have a career that spans the non-profit NGO sector and academics and research as well. So lovely to join you.
Thanks, Steph. That's great. Ray.
Hi, my name's Ray Thomas. I am the Research Education Lead for the Tropical Australian Academic Health Centre here in Townsville with both Sarah and Steph. I have been an academic researcher for around about 12 years now, have varying sort of successes across grants from small to medium to largish in different capacities. Most of my research before I joined TARC, which is relatively recently, was about looking at different methods of consumer engagement in health research and health policy design. And that's sort of a lot of where my publications have come from, as well as the field of overdiagnosis.
Fantastic, Ray. Thank you very much. So what I'd like to encourage you to do is to post on chat any questions that you have or any topics you'd like our speakers to talk to that really focus in on your individual areas of interest and need. But I've got a few questions. We'll take Chair's privilege to fire them to get our experts warmed up. So I might start with perhaps just your grant writing journey. Perhaps if you could just describe that to us, each of you. So how did you get your grant writing career underway, and what was the sort of, did you have any strategy to start with, or was it just something that happened? Just describe us in general terms.
Were you directing that to anyone in particular, Kate?
No, oh, sorry. I was getting the screens down. So Sarah, thank you for asking. I'm directing it to you.
Yeah, great. Okay, you'll have to excuse me being a little inarticulate today. I've hopped off an international flight yesterday, so I'm a bit jet lagged. But I'm a kind of an accidental academic. I started off very much as a clinician, doing some research in general practice in Aboriginal community control health services that didn't require grants. I did do some lab-based research as a student too, but really my first experience with grant writing was applying for a PhD scholarship through the NHMRC postgraduate scholarship scheme, and was lucky enough to have some good mentors who gave me some good advice through that time. And that's probably the biggest bit of advice I'd have. Get some people around you who are happy to give you advice and read your grant applications. I was lucky enough to be successful in that. But then after that, there was a long period of applying for small grants, or applying for small and large grants, but only being successful at the small grants, and gradually building a track record as I got more and more involved in doing research along with clinical work and a little bit of academic work. And then through getting involved in other people's grants and very consciously making contact with people with good track records and asking them to be investigators on my grant applications, so I could effectively piggyback off their track records, gradually building some grant success in the bigger grant schemes. And over the years, research and academic work has become more and more of my role, and also supervising and mentoring others as they get into the journey as well. And it's a very satisfying part of it. So that's my trajectory. I'm sure the others have got different paths to share.
Yeah, that's a great story. Thank you, Sarah. Steph.
Yeah, so I have also, I guess, a non-traditional path into academic grant writing, which was that my first sort of really substantial role post-graduate study, but not post-PhD, was working with a non-government organisation in Zambia on the implementation and scale-up of HIV care. I was on the program management side. I'm not a clinician. And the NGO that I worked for, of course, was reliant on soft funding. And so on a bi-monthly basis, basically, we were pulling together grant applications that funded different aspects of the work that we were doing, where everyone was on soft money. So everyone was responsible for sort of participating in both large and small grant writing efforts. So some of those grants were massive, kind of US government, tens of millions of dollars over 5 years. And some of them were, 10 or 20,000 for incredibly specific short-term efforts on the ground. Although there was a lot of pressure associated with that because it was salary, everyone was in the same boat, and so it tended to be quite collegial. And I learned a lot in that process from senior colleagues about grantsmanship, about the strategies involved with thinking about what your funders are looking for, how to package that in a narrative, and also a really underappreciated skill in grant writing, how to budget for these programs. And it's something, over and under budgeting are two very common mistakes that can either scuttle the success of the application or scuttle the success of the work if you are funded because you don't have enough money to do it. Anyway, when I moved back to Australia and I started working at James Cook University, those skills were all very important. but I had a very similar sort of experience to Sarah, in the sense that I was immediately post PhD at that point. I had to apply for many grants. I started to gain experience, often through rejection, about how to work in the Australian funding environment, and what Australian research funders in particular were looking for. And I would simply echo the experiences and the recommendations around mentorship, which in the same way as for Sarah have sort of started to help me start to get more success in some of the larger granting schemes, although I'm still much earlier in that process than she is. Thanks, Kate.
Thank you very much. Right.
Yeah, hi. They've both said very, very similar experiences to me. I like the accidental researcher. I was a clinician for a very long time and accidentally popped in, liked research so much, became a research only. Was very privileged to do that and to have that opportunity. But I guess one of the things that I think was pivotal in me learning how to do this accidentally, not planned, but always curious about how to learn. And so when I was a PhD student, my supervisor was writing her own grants. She's quite a prolific researcher internationally. And so I just helped her, basically. And I would say that I co-authored some of those grants with her, but I wasn't named on it. And because that was my learning. It was about how to go about doing that. And also so echo the idea that you start with the smaller grants when you start doing it by yourself, right? And these grants that Kate spoke about earlier are the perfect opportunity to start building that track record and to start understanding what it's like to write a grant, because, you know, the feedback and rejection is really pivotal to your learning. So in my CV, you've got this, you know, section that says grant successes, and I've got a little line that says, so many unsuccessful. If you'd like me to write a list, you know, feel free to ask. But then what happened was, what again, kind of taking on that learning about co-authoring with people, is that I belonged to a group of people who were extremely collegiate. And like Steph, we're all on soft money. And so had to write grants in order to fund institutes and to fund postdocs and PhDs and to do the work they wanted to do. So not underestimating that the impact of being in a group of people who share their experiences and accidentally mentor you in ways that you can improve your writing. And so I would ask to sit in on meetings when they're writing their CRE grant applications and stuff, just to learn what they talk about, to learn what are the issues that they thrash out on the table. And then eventually, after a couple of those, I was invited to be an AI on some. So then I got to help write. But I was also named as an AI on it, and then it morphed into CI stuff on larger grants. So it's just that iteration of learning. And for me, I didn't plan it. It seems to be what happens in my career. It's like, oh, that sounds fun. I think I'll go over there and do that. But really good learning. Don't expect people to come to you and think you're awesome. Go and make yourself valuable and actually help people write their stuff, because that helps you become a better writer and just understand the process.
Fantastic, Ray. Well, thank you all for that. I'm struck by the phrase of play it forward. It seems that collegiate generosity has been your experience, and I know, because your valued colleague is mine, that you actually you walk the talk, walk the walk as well, and you're very generous as well. But I think it's important for all of us to be generous, and that way it makes everyone more successful, which is great. One of the things that now, please, actually, I'll look at those. Hello, Rav. That's lovely to see your name there. I will. Rav is saying that Steph raised an important issue about learning from feedback. How do you overcome situations where you find that the feedback is scant and fierce competition is used as the reason for you not being successful? Okay, who'd like to take that one?
I can give one response to that, which is that you shouldn't don't rely on your official feedback only. Go seek out feedback pre-application and post-application from mentors and colleagues who will be more generous with their time. Because the reviewers, especially on the big grant schemes, are, as you say, sometimes not methodologically expert in your area, sometimes not content experts, and their perspective on what you're writing is going to be coloured by that. Getting colleagues to help you construct a grant that accounts for those reviewer biases is actually part of the process, and it doesn't necessarily take the sting out of fierce feedback, but realizing that you don't only have to rely on that official feedback is a big part of not feeling squashed by the process.
That's great, Steph. Thanks. Rav and Dorinda, I hope that addresses, and we'll get Sarah to add to that. Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, thanks. I agree with that 100%. And also, the more opportunities you can get to be part of grant review panels or do review other grants yourself, the more you learn. So just looking at a whole lot of grant applications and think, yep, that one's really clear, that one's really good. That one, you know, it's a good idea, but the way it's presented, to learn about grantsmanship, grantspersonship, it's really important to do that. And I remember sitting on an NHMRC panel and talking with Professor Alex Brown about this, and you know, he's been around the traps for a while. So he's got a lot more experience than me, but just talking about the importance of that. You know, that first page being absolutely crystal clear, grabbing the reviewer's attention, and outlining the whole substance of the grant in that first page, and the importance of the grantsmanship around that and in getting it right. And one way to learn that is just to read and review a whole lot of them and be part of those discussions. So NHMRC and MRFF and other grant bodies are often looking for early career researchers to be part of their panels as assistant chairs. That's one role, or in other capacities. And if you get the chance, or if there's someone around you who can put you forward, or you can nominate yourself, then please take it, because you learn a lot that way.
How early is too early to put your name forward as an ECR?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, strictly speaking, by definition, you need to be postdoctoral. And I don't know any examples for NHMRC panels of someone being appointed without that. But I'm always one. I often advance the argument that there are plenty of ECRs that don't yet have a doctorate for a variety of reasons. So I don't see any problem in nominating yourself, and given the absence of or the limitations in peer reviewers, you just might get a go.
Perfect. Thank you. Ray, I might get you to address Suzanne's question, if I may. So Suzanne is asking about the difference in definition of an early career researcher and an early career academic.
I looked at that question too and thought, oh, it's a good question. There are specific definitions, and Sarah knows exactly how many years post PhD, I think, is the literal definition between early career researcher and mid career researcher. I think it's 8. Am I correct, Sarah? I think it's 8 years post PhD.
I thought it was 10, but it might have changed recently. Yeah, but
so I think that
somewhere around that. It's the date post PhD is the sort of research relevant.
Just for noting, taking you back to the WHRTN funding round, we've taken a more inclusive approach to those definitions, and so we've don't require early career researchers to have a PhD, but ideally to be working towards a higher degree by research, and up until 15 years for a mid-career researcher, so up to 5, and then also there's that relative to opportunity bit. So is it specific to different organisations? I think most lead sort of tend to emulate the NHMRC definition, but yes, WHRTN is a little bit more inclusive. And I suppose the researcher is probably, for a career researcher, is talking of someone who's in a research position, so a research only position, compared to an academic which might have a teaching research blend.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I guess the reason the WHRTN group has taken a more inclusive and broader approach is recognition that for women in particular, the research career development is often a less linear ride than for male researchers, with various interruptions, as you've heard from us, sort of different combinations of clinical, academic, research roles that might play and other outside roles that might play a part.
Well, we might stay on that theme, and as you've said, women researchers are oftentimes confronted with career interruptions. Can any of you, or can you all share with us any interruptions that you've had, and how you sort of communicated that on a grant application, or how do you think it's best communicated on a grant application? Steph.
Yeah, many interruptions. I thought maybe, I mean, that life is complex, right? That none of us lead this linear life where we have a perfect sort of 8 to 5 allocation on a research only role. That's sort of an idealized scenario. I think some of the strategies that have stood me in good stead are recognizing that being disciplined with your time is as much about forcing others to be disciplined about how they use your time as much as it is about your own behavior. In research teams and in universities in particular, there is inevitable creep in roles and responsibilities, precisely because of all the things we've just been talking about, because we want opportunities and we need these soft opportunities to participate, to learn through osmosis. But all of those things will have, there's a limit to how much you can do, and recognizing the opportunity cost of every time you say yes to something is a skill that you need to learn in order to be able to evaluate whether or not this is something that you can take on without it sort of either sending you under because of overcommitment and burnout, or eating into something which strategically, professionally, is much more important to you. In terms of how you communicate all of that on an application, it's tricky. Reviewers are grumpy, time-constrained individuals, and so they don't want your life story. But one of the best pieces of advice that I was given in terms of how to communicate what for me has actually been a surprisingly limited official time allocation to research is to quantify it. So I'm going to give you this equation, and it's very simple, but basically, so if I am, for example, a teaching research academic with a traditional 40% allocated to research, 40% allocated to teaching, and 20% to service roles. So that means at baseline, of my total work effort, 40% or 4.8 months out of every 12 is meant for research. So I graduated my PhD in 2013, and I had about 1 year of full-time research in a postdoctoral role. But then I got my job at JCU as a teaching research academic. So for the past 9 years, I have had 4.8 months out of every 12 months allocated to research. 9 times 4.8 months is 43.2 months, plus the 12 for that postdoctoral role, 53.2 months. That's 4.6 years. I am 4.6 years post-PhD in my research career. And you can do that in 2 lines in a grant application. And you can do it so I've just used professional time allocation, but let's say you were on mat leave. So you could take out the FTE. So you just have to convert your time into months and remove any months where you were not spending time on research out of the equation of your post-PhD research allocation. And that really helps you communicate how much time has been spent on research, and it will really bring back, it will mean that you're eligible for much longer, as you should be. So that's my one hot tip.
That was 1,000 hot tips, Steph. Thank you very much. That's really, really powerful. Ray, over to you. Follow that if you can.
Can't. That's not fair. Look, I started my research career late. so I didn't have a lot, and I didn't have a lot of the pressures I think that younger people would have had in their career. By the time I started my research career, I did my PhD while my kids were young, so I did that over a part-time PhD, and I managed a research program while I was doing that as a manager, not as a researcher. Then I spent a post-PhD, I spent a couple of years still doing that. So I actually didn't commence my research career, and I do articulate this in grants, until about 2011. But then I was a full-time researcher, so I didn't have to do the calcs that Stephanie did. And my kids were much older. So I've been extremely fortunate that I haven't had anywhere near, I don't think, the same career disruptions that others have had. Having a research-only position for the past, 10, 11 years was extremely helpful to me. And I feel very, very privileged for that I recognise that I am uncommon, potentially. So I feel like that's a question that I don't really have the answer to, but I do like Steph's equation very, very much.
That's incredibly powerful, isn't it? Fantastic. Well, we've talked a little bit about the opportunity to be on an assessment panel, and you've all been there. So as an assessor of grant applications, what are the most common errors you see, and how can they be avoided? So maybe to Sarah first.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. I guess one of the really common mistakes is writing as an expert in a particular field, which of course you are. If you're writing a grant in a particular area, you are an expert in your particular field. But it's really important to write the application as if you were an intelligent non-expert, and get people to review it who are intelligent non-experts or from another field entirely, to make sure that it's clear to them. Because as an expert in an area, it's very easy to make a whole lot of assumptions about what's known and what other people know about your topic area, and you take for granted a lot of tacit knowledge in your area and don't make it clear enough for the reader. So that's probably the single biggest mistake that I see.
Thanks, Sarah. Steph.
I agree with Sarah, and actually I wanted to, I guess, build on a comment that Sarah also made earlier about the importance of that first page. I think one of the biggest mistakes I see, and it's related to your positioning as an expert and your presumption that the people reading it are expert, is that you write too much background. Sort of there's this long lead in, almost like an academic paper. And it's a common mistake because often early career researchers at that point, their primary experience in writing has been for a research paper, where that's how you construct it. Nice, hefty introduction, methods, discussion. But in a grant, you sort of have to flip the logic. As Sarah said, both the rationale, the justification, the nature of the problem, the rationale for wanting to do what you want to do, and an overview of what you're going to do, all have to be on that first page. A really succinct, powerful summary of the whole thing on that first page, and spending the time, allowing yourself the time to get feedback on refining that is a common pitfall, leaving it too late to be able to create that first page very powerfully.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks, Steph. Ray.
Look, I think that first page is critical. Totally agree. And I think sometimes what people don't do is tell me why this project and why now. Like, you know, you got to be really clear. Don't give me stats. Tell me why this project and why now. Why is this scheme the exact one that you should be applying for, and know the scheme well? So in that one pager, or in that, you know, that first bit, really know your scheme, really hit why this project applies to that scheme, and really hit why it should be funded right now. Leave the reviewer under no illusions that yours is a project that should be happening now and why it should be happening now. And I think if you don't hit that, and if you don't nail that, reviewers review lots of these. And if you don't capture their attention right at the start with something really good, they're going to be bored, and you don't want to make them grumpy, like Steph said. You don't want to make them grumpy. You want to make them engaged and go, oh, I will read on. That's your goal. Number one, that's your first goal.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really important, given that most people are reviewing grants, you know, after hours, or it's one of those additional extra activities that you do, and it's not at peak brain functioning time, and so you do have to make it really easy, and that's why, you know, when you're thinking about applying for a grant, starting with that, what's the problem, you know, what's the problem that needs to be addressed, what's my question that I need to answer, and how am I going to address it, and making that really clear, which is also a really good way to engage others in coming on board with a project with you, is very important, I think.
Fantastic. Lots of great advice there. I might just go over to the chat and we'll get some responses from you. So Steph, could you look at Giselle's issue there? And she's asking, how do you identify the right funding body for your research?
Research. do your research. When so talk to colleagues, talk to your university or institute's grants team if you have one, talk to other PhD students or other postdocs in your team and ask them about grants. There is also many universities subscribe to a grants clearinghouse whose name I have temporarily forgotten. Sarah, can you prompt me?
Research Professional.
Thank you, Research Professional. So if you're not already aware of that, and if you're affiliated with an institution, ask them about that. That will send like a digest of upcoming and current grants into your email inbox every week. But in terms of identifying what's appropriate to you, there's nothing like reading the guidelines. It's a pain, it is an administrative task, but the first thing you should do if you're interested in a grant is look at the eligibility, look at the criteria, and look at the stated objectives of the grant itself. And if all three of those things are aligned with your interests, your capabilities, and the work that you want to do, or if it's sufficiently aligned, then you can take the next step and start the conversations.
Terrific. Ray, were you leaning forward to say something?
I'm just very engaged.
No, I know. Yes. So I'll keep your engagement and get you to have a look at Ali's comment. She
That's
says,
the one I was interested in answering. I agree.
I thought you might be.
Yeah.
I'm a qualitative researcher and interested in women's stories of experience and using arts-based methods to communicate lived experience. However, so many grants value quantifiable outcomes rather than deepening an understanding of lived experience. Any hints for helping grant bodies value a woman's way of knowing and being, to value their experiences, say of aging or pregnancy or wellness?
Well, I feel Ali's pain. Yes, everyone here does too. I think that I really resonated with that question merely because early on, a lot of my work was about consumer involvement in research, and I'm not traditionally a qual researcher. I started off as very quant, but I have some qual experience now too. And one of the things I was told, and I think is really important, that kept saying, but there's nowhere for me to go. And it's like, yes, but you actually need to be flexible, right? So you actually have to develop your track record, as we've spoken about that before. That's not, but you need to be flexible. So if you want to know about, if you're interested in identifying women's ways of knowing and being, that's not, I'm going to say the word disease specific, that phrase, that's not that. So you actually have it's a methods question, and it's about understanding, and you can create a methods question around that to identify how can you best elicit those kind of ways of knowing and being. And so then you actually, if you think like that, it opens up to you a whole raft of possibilities. But you are right in suggesting that right now, I don't feel like the big funders are ready to go totally over to your side. So I think it involves, for the big grants, you might have to involve partnerships. So you are part of the answer, an important part of the answer, and an equal part of the answer, but part of the answer, which does involve some quant. But for the smaller schemes, for the little bits and pieces of knowing, there are some really good schemes, like potentially, like, you know, what about some health insurers that want to know what people are like? But change your question into a methods question about how can you best do it. That would be my thoughts on that.
No, fantastic. Steph, I might get, oh no, Sarah, if you could add to that, thank you.
I'm sure Steph would have a more coherent answer, but the bit I would add to what Ray said, which I completely agree with, is also be sure that you do it well. So if you're using qualitative approaches, phenomenological approaches, do them well, do them in a really theoretically informed way, and communicate that to the reviewers as well. And that helps, and pick the grant schemes that might be interested in that. Thanks. Sorry, Steph, over to you.
Fantastic. Actually, I'm just conscious of the time, so I'm just going to give Steph another one, if I may. So Lisa's query here, I spent 2 years as an SRO under the professional stream rather than the academic stream within a university research public policy institute. Some research was spent on research, but a lot of this was spent on building the institute's strategy, relationship building, policy and issue reports. Would this time be considered academic research or a non-academic research role in terms of the baseline?
Based on your description, Lisa, I would say that's a non-research role in which you had maybe a small proportion, 10 or 20% allocated to research, and that's how I would characterize it.
Thanks,
if you're not researching, then it's not research.
Terrific. So Sarah, Suzanne says, if I'm an early career academic, I think it is, and the chief investigator, is it favourable to highlight that an experienced researcher is mentoring me?
Yes. in this scheme, in the Wharton grant scheme, but also in general, if you yes, one of my early mentors used to say, you know, just fess up, you know, fess up to your positionality, fess up to the stage of your career, be really open and transparent about it. But any weaknesses in your own experience, be really honest about those, and make sure they're filled by the people you have around you. And whether that be research methodological expertise or research experience or statistics or economics or whatever it is that you need, bring it into the people around you to fill that gap. Yep. And that's a strength rather than a weakness. Yep.
Great. I might just take Dorinda's question that talks of whereabouts the rationale and hitting the scheme as was just advised. Does this belong in the lay summary? So certainly it needs to be in the lay summary, but it also needs to be in the background of the grant to make that to express the rationale for doing, as Ray said, really good point. Why this question and why now? That's particularly helpful things to remember. So I might then throw to Stephanie, I think. Lisa has spent the last 2 years battling a serious health issue, which has led to its debilitating brain fog and unable to work, and hospitalised 5 times. I'm keen to use this lived experience and apply for a grant related to this. over to you, Sarah. Stephanie.
Lisa, I think that sounds like a really positive way of making this a strengths-based experience, but that doesn't mean that you should feel obliged to account for that time as research time. I think you should definitely account for the time that you were hospitalized, and even the time outside of hospital where you were recovering or not able to be actively researching, and account for that in your career progression. But talk about how that experience then has informed a focus and a mission to build knowledge and expertise in this area. And I think that that would be a strength.
Right.
I agree with Steph, and I think that her answers Lisa's next thing about applying for a fellowship and how does she communicate her career has been disrupted by the health issue. When Steph's point was to turn it into a strength, it has provided you with focus. Like, you know, you now have a clear focus about a research direction, and you would like to use your lived experience in that research project. But I also think that you should bear in mind with Sarah's bit about make sure if you're able to have other CIs, how are you going to strengthen your skill set with others? So you have your lived experience, and that's really important. What do you not have that you need from others, either in a mentoring capacity or in a CI capacity? Because that will also help. You have focus, you know what you want, but how are you going to gather around the other skills that make you a very viable candidate here?
Fantastic. Thank you. Yep.
And also think about a methodology that you can use that you know is appropriate for that, and draw on that theoretically, you know, be it autoethnography or you know whatever it is, because you know, again, it's complex, researching your own experience. I mean, there are ways to do it, well. The other bit about career disruptions is and Steph did highlight this, is just being really factual about it. So, you know, I read a lot of these, and the NHMRC is very strong about no one being disadvantaged on the grounds of career disruptions, and making sure that they are being taken into account. But just being very factual and as unemotive as you possibly can be in terms of reporting, you know, that what actually happened and the impact it had on your time is really important. You do see some that go into every little minutiae of various different things, and it can get a little tedious after a while.
Fantastic. So we've only got a few more minutes left, but I do want to squeeze every bit of expertise out of you. So I'm going to pose a question about what gems can you share about budgeting? We've already heard the importance of not too much and not too little, both of them being a problem, but what is it that you do or you find helpful in actually getting that right?
Well, the first thing is to be very clear about what it is you plan to do. To budget well, you can't fudge your actual study design. So you need to know what you're going to do, in what order, and with whom. And once you have those three pieces of information, then you can plot out what it costs to implement any given activities. And very importantly, and this is where the under budgeting usually comes in, work with a senior mentor to generate appropriate salary estimates. So especially if you work within a university or an institute, there are often hidden costs like overheads, and not factoring those in can leave you up to 30% short in your salary. And if it's a sort of a personnel intensive piece of research, then that can be the difference between being able to implement it and not. So a very clear study design first, followed by just a clear accounting of what has to happen and what resources you need. and then sitting down with someone who has expertise in the salary components at your institution to identify what it will cost to have those people on at that time.
Thanks, Steph. Ray.
Totally agree. Absolutely. You need the expert help. I was done early on by those on costs that are just so hidden. they're significant. So you really need to be aware of those, and experts at your place are able to help you with that. Even the HHSs, I don't mean even, the HHSs, which we call in Queensland the health services up here, they do have experts in finance, and they can sit with you and work out what this might be. My addition to what Steph says is consumer engagement is now a very big buzzword, and people want you to do that, but you also have to pay them too. So you need to know what their salary rate is, the hourly salary rate, and you need to factor that into your budget, which hasn't caught on yet, but it will very soon. So you need to factor that in also.
Great point, Ray. Thank you very much. Sarah, you get the final words on this.
On budgeting. So, well, yeah, I think knowing what the big costs are in the type of work you do, for me, it's people costs and travel costs, and some consumer engagement, but and being very clear on exactly what you're doing with whom, so that you know how much people time you're going to need to get that done, and what sort of a person, and being able to cost that appropriately. Most universities have a research costing tool, but again, it's something to have a go. I think you always need to be willing to back yourself and have a go and put down what you think, and then it's much easier to have an informed discussion with a critical mentor, critical in the best way, mentor who can advise you where you need to perhaps add more, and you almost always will have underestimated.
Fantastic. Well, I'd like to really thank you all so much. I mean, Sarah, that's a top effort flying in, particularly to speak to us. That's much appreciated. Stephanie and Ray, thank you all for being so generous. It seems to be an hour of generosity. We really appreciate it. I learned lots, and I'm sure the audience did as well. There's lots of gems for us to take forward. Really appreciate you sharing them with us. And thank everyone for attending. It's a great degree of interest, and this has been recorded, so you'll be able to jump on the WHRTN website and make sure you have a look at that grant screen. We'd like to be inundated with applications. Take care.
Thanks,
Bye.
Kate. Bye.
Thanks to Helen and to Vanessa too.
Right.